The first thing I felt was the suffocating, powdery dust coating the inside of my throat. I coughed violently, my lungs burning as I forced my eyes open. Blinding, unforgiving sunlight stabbed at my retinas. I raised a hand to shield my face, my skin already feeling tight and blistered from an oven-like heat that seemed to radiate from the very ground beneath me. I sat up slowly, my head pounding with a severe dehydration headache. As my vision cleared, the landscape that revealed itself was nothing short of a nightmare. I was sitting in the middle of a vast, cracked wasteland. The earth was baked into jagged, grayish-brown polygons, entirely devoid of grass or moisture. In the distance, jagged mountains pierced the pale, cloudless sky, their peaks stripped bare of any snow or vegetation. Where the hell am I? I croaked, my voice sounding like grinding sandpaper. The last thing I remembered was sitting in my gaming chair, loading up a brand new, heavily modded survival world on my PC. The screen had flashed a blinding white, and then, nothing, until now, as I blinked, trying to clear the remaining blurriness from my eyes. Something completely unnatural caught my attention. Hovering at the very bottom edge of my peripheral vision was a translucent, floating interface. I froze. I blinked hard, but the interface did not disappear. It stayed perfectly locked to my field of view. Down at the bottom, there was a row of 9 empty square slots outlined in gray. Just above those slots, on the left side, were 10 pixelated red hearts, perfectly rendered and gently pulsing in rhythm with my actual heartbeat. On the right side, opposite the hearts, were 10 icons shaped like cooked drumsticks. My breath hitched. No way, I whispered to the empty wasteland. This is a hotbar. These are health and hunger meters. This is Minecraft. I pushed myself up onto my feet, swaying slightly as a wave of dizziness hit me. The hunger bar was missing 3 drumsticks, explaining the gnawing emptiness in my stomach. But the thirst I felt was far more immediate and dangerous. I focused my mind, acting on pure gamer instinct, and mentally willed my inventory to open. Instantly, a large grid materialized in front of my face, suspending itself in the shimmering hot air. It was a perfect recreation of the classic survival inventory screen. My character model stood in the center, wearing the simple blue t-shirt and jeans I had fallen asleep in. But it was the slots below that drew my desperate attention. I was not completely empty-handed. In my starting inventory, there were exactly 2 items. In one slot sat a stack of 64 dirt blocks, and right next to it, the most beautiful sight my dehydrated eyes could process, 2 solid iron buckets, both filled to the brim with water. Before I could even figure out how to materialize the buckets into the real world, a sharp, raspy voice broke the silence of the wasteland. Don't move a single muscle, stranger. I slowly turned my head. Standing about 20 feet away from me were 2 figures. They looked like they had stepped straight out of a post-apocalyptic nightmare. The one aiming a rusted, jagged spear at my chest was a young woman. Her name, hovering in a faint white text above her head like a player name tag, read Clara Hayes. Her face was smeared with ash and dirt, her lips cracked and bleeding from severe dehydration. She wore scraps of hardened leather and faded cloth, her eyes wide with a mixture of predatory caution and absolute desperation. Beside her leaned an elderly man using a splintered wooden staff just to keep himself upright. His name tag read Elias Thorne. His skin was like wrinkled parchment, his eyes sunken deep into his skull. He looked like a stiff breeze could turn him to dust. Behind them, further down a shallow ravine, I could see the ruins of a makeshift camp. Torn canvas tents flapped weakly in the dry wind. Dozens of people lay in the shadows of the rocks, too weak to even lift their heads. They were refugees, and they were dying. I said, "Don't move," Clara repeated, her hands trembling violently as she gripped the heavy iron-tipped spear. She eyed my clean clothes, a stark contrast to their rags. "Who are you? Are you a scout for the Royal Army? Did Mercer send you to mock us?" I raised my hand slowly, making sure to keep my palms open and visible. "I am not a scout," I said, my voice cracking again. "My name is Arthur Vance. I don't know who Mercer is. And I don't know where I am." Elias placed a frail, trembling hand on Clara's shoulder, gently pushing the spear down. "Peace, Clara," the old man wheezed, his voice barely a whisper. "Look at him. He has no weapons, no royal crest. He is just another lost soul claimed by the Deadlands." Clara lowered the spear slightly but did not relax her stance. Her eyes darted to my waist, then back to my face. "He looks too clean, Elias. But it doesn't matter. He has no water on him. Neither do we. We are all going to die here by nightfall anyway." Elias looked at me, a profound sadness in his cloudy eyes. "Forgive my granddaughter, Arthur. The wells of our village dried up 3 weeks ago. Governor Mercer confiscated our remaining reserves for his soldiers and cast us out into the wastes. We have not had a drop to drink in 4 days. The children, they will not survive another hour in this heat." I looked past them, toward the camp. I could hear the faint, heartbreaking whimpers of infants and the dry, hacking coughs of the elderly. This was not a game to them. This was a brutal, unforgiving reality. I looked back at Clara. Her tough exterior was just a fragile shell covering profound despair. She was watching her family and her people slowly wither away into nothing. And she was utterly powerless to stop it, but I wasn't. I mentally accessed my hotbar. I moved the 2 water buckets down into the first 2 slots. I can help you, I said, my voice steadying. I have water. Clara let out a bitter, dry laugh. Water. You are delirious from the sun. Arthur, you are carrying nothing. Not a canteen, not a flask. Where are you hiding this water? In your pockets. Just watch, I said. I stepped forward, looking for a flat patch of the baked, cracked earth. The system mechanics were screaming in my mind. If I just poured the water onto the ground, it would soak into the parched dirt and vanish instantly. 2 buckets were not enough to save 50 people. I needed to manipulate the fundamental physics of my old reality. I needed to create an infinite water source. I stopped about 10 feet away from Clara and Elias. I knelt down. How is he doing? Elias murmured, leaning heavily on his staff. I raised my right fist and punched the solid, rock-hard ground. I expected my knuckles to shatter. I expected skin to tear and bone to break. Instead, the moment my fist made contact with the earth, a web of white, glowing cracks instantly appeared on the ground. It made a hollow, satisfying pop sound. Clara gasped, taking a step back. By the maker. I punched the ground a second time. Pop. Suddenly, a perfect 1 meter cubic block of the earth simply vanished. It didn't crumble into dust. It didn't leave a pile of debris. The ground just ceased to exist in that exact cubic space, leaving a perfectly smooth, square hole. A miniature, spinning block of dirt floated out of the hole and magically absorbed directly into my chest, depositing itself straight into my inventory. The laws of physics in this world had just been violently shattered. Elias dropped his staff, his jaw hanging open. Clara gripped her spear so tightly her knuckles turned white, her eyes wide with sheer terror and awe. What? What kind of sorcery is that? She screamed, her voice cracking. I ignored her. I moved to my right and punched the ground again. Pop. Another perfect cubic meter vanished. I stepped back and punched 2 more times, forming a perfect 2x2 square trench in the dirt, exactly 1 block deep. Arthur, what are you doing? Elias whispered, falling to his knees as he stared at the geometrically impossible square hole I had just carved out of the earth with my bare hands. I am saving your people, I said calmly. I willed the first item in my hotbar into reality. There was a flash of pixelated light in my right hand, and suddenly, a heavy, cold iron bucket materialized out of thin air. It was brimming with crystal clear, freezing cold water. The sheer impossibility of a bucket of water appearing from nothing made Clara drop her spear entirely. Water, Elias gasped, tears welling up in his dry eyes. Real water. Wait, don't waste it, Clara yelled, suddenly surging forward as she realized what I was about to do. If you pour it on the ground, the dead earth will just swallow it. We need to ration it. Please. She was applying the logic of her world, but I was operating under the rules of mine. Trust me, I said. I stepped to the top left corner of the 2x2 hole and tipped the bucket. The water poured out in a massive, unnatural torrent. It didn't splash randomly. It flowed like a thick, blue liquid crystal, perfectly spreading out to fill the immediate space, creating a rushing current that pushed toward the other corners. As soon as the bucket was empty, it vanished back into my inventory. I immediately equipped the second bucket in my left hand. I stepped to the bottom right corner of the square hole, the exact opposite diagonal corner from where I had placed the first source block. Arthur, no. Half of it is already gone, Clara cried out, watching the water swirl in the dirt, expecting it to vanish into the mud at any second. I poured the second bucket. The 2 flowing currents of water met in the center of the geometric hole. For a split second, the water churned and foamed violently, and then the physics engine of the system took over. The rushing current stopped. The water instantly leveled out. It flattened into a perfectly calm, glassy surface, filling the entire 2x2 trench to the brim. It didn't soak into the dirt. It didn't evaporate in the blazing heat. It just sat there, defying every single law of thermodynamics and nature. I looked at the water. It was a perfect infinite water source. I unequipped the empty bucket and stepped back. Drink, I told them. Clara didn't hesitate anymore. The primal instinct of survival completely overrode her fear of the unknown. She threw herself onto the ground at the edge of the pool, plunging her cupped hands into the freezing liquid and bringing it to her cracked lips. She drank frantically, the water spilling down her chin and washing the ash from her neck. Elias crawled forward, his trembling hands scooping up the water. He drank deeply, letting out a sob of pure, unadulterated relief. Clara drank until she was gasping for air, but as she pulled her hands away, she froze. She stared at the pool of water. She had just scooped out at least 3 large handfuls of water, but the water level in the trench hadn't dropped a single millimeter. Trembling, Clara reached her hands in again and violently scooped out a massive splash of water, throwing it onto the dry earth beside her. The moment the water left the pool, the remaining water inside the trench rippled for a microsecond before instantly flattening out again. The volume completely regenerated itself out of thin air. The pool remained completely full. Clara's breath caught in her throat. She looked at the water, then slowly raised her head to look at me. The fear in her eyes was gone, replaced by a terrifying, overwhelming reverence. It refills itself, Clara whispered, her voice trembling with absolute shock. No matter how much I take, the water replaces itself. It's infinite. Elias slowly pulled himself up to his knees. The old man placed his hands flat on the cracked earth and bowed his head until his forehead touched the dirt right at the tips of my shoes. A miracle, Elias wept, his voice shaking with religious fervor. The old texts spoke of this. They said when the world was dying, a creator would descend from the heavens to rewrite the laws of the earth, a god of architecture and life. He looked up at me, tears streaming down his rejuvenated face. You are not a scout, Arthur. You are a deity. You have come to deliver us from the void. I stood there, looking down at the old man worshipping me, and the young warrior looking at me like I held the stars in my hands. I looked at the perfectly square pool of infinite water, realizing the absolute, terrifying magnitude of the power I held. In a world dying from scarcity and ruled by cruel physics, a man who could spawn infinite resources and reshape matter with a punch wasn't just a survivor. I was going to be a god. The news of the water spread through the dying camp faster than a wildfire. At first, it was just a weak, disbelieving murmur among the ragged tents. But when Elias and Clara began carrying handfuls of the crystal clear, freezing water to the lips of the collapsed refugees, the murmur turned into a desperate, chaotic surge. Dozens of skeletal figures dragged themselves across the baked earth, crawling on their hands and knees toward the Tubituo square trench I had carved into the wasteland. They fell to the edges of the pool, weeping openly as they plunged their faces into the water. They drank with the frantic, messy desperation of people who had been staring death in the eyes just moments before. And through it all, the water never receded. Every drop they consumed was instantly and miraculously replenished by the unseen physics engine of my system. The glassy surface remained perfectly full, defying the blistering wasteland sun. I stood a few yards away, watching the scene unfold. My own thirst had been quenched, but the hunger bar at the bottom right of my vision was now flashing. I was down to 5 drumsticks. My stomach let out a violent growl. The water is a blessing, Arthur, Clara said, walking over to me. Her face was clean now, the ash and dirt washed away to reveal sharp, striking features and piercing green eyes. But despite the water, she looked up at the sky with deep dread. But the sun is still going to kill them. We have no shade. The canvas tents are rotting, and the heat reflects off this dead earth like a mirror. Even with the water, the infants will bake alive before dusk. I looked up. The sun was an oppressive, blinding white orb directly overhead. She was right. Hydration was only half the battle. They needed shelter. I scanned the desolate horizon. About 50 yards away, jutting out of the cracked earth like the ribs of a buried leviathan, were massive, petrified tree trunks. They were completely stripped of bark or leaves, fossilized by centuries of harsh wasteland winds. I will build a shelter, I said simply. Clara followed my gaze and shook her head, a look of grim hopelessness returning to her face. With what? Those are ironwood husks. The wood is so fossilized and hard that it shatters steel axes. Governor Mercer's men tried to harvest them for a forward operating base months ago, and gave up. You cannot cut them, Arthur, and even if you could, we have no tools, no nails, and no ropes. I don't need tools, I replied, and I don't need nails. I walked toward the nearest petrified tree. It was massive, roughly a meter thick, towering about 20 feet into the air. Clara and Elias followed closely behind me, along with a few of the stronger refugees who were now looking at me like I was a walking, breathing deity. I stepped right up to the solid, stone-like surface of the dead tree. I raised my right fist. Arthur, you will shatter every bone in your hand, Clara warned, reaching out as if to stop me. I threw my fist into the trunk. Instead of the sickening crunch of breaking bone, a loud, hollow thwack echoed across the wasteland. A web of glowing white cracks spiderwebbed across the surface of the wood. I punched it again, thwack, and again, thwack. On the fourth punch, the physics of my reality completely shattered the logic of theirs. Pop! A perfect cubic meter of the petrified tree vanished with a satisfying sound. A small, floating block of oak log spun in the air before zooming directly into my chest, depositing itself into my inventory. But that was not the part that made Clara scream, because I had punched out the bottom block of the tree trunk. The remaining 19 feet of the massive, multi-ton tree was now completely disconnected from the ground. Yet, it did not fall. It simply hovered there, suspended perfectly in midair, entirely ignoring the laws of gravity. By the maker, an older refugee shrieked, falling to his knees and clutching his head. The wood, it hangs in the sky. Gravity is optional for me, I muttered with a grin. I proceeded to punch the block directly above my head. Pop! Another oak log entered my inventory. I jumped up, stood on the flat stump of the earth, and punched the next one. I worked my way up, dismantling the massive tree block by block, until I had a stack of 20 oak logs in my inventory. I jumped down, landing perfectly on the dirt without a scratch. I opened my inventory screen. In my mind, I dragged the 20 oak logs into the small Tubito crafting grid located in my inventory menu. In the output slot, 80 oak planks appeared. I clicked them into my inventory, and just like that, solid, unprocessed logs were instantly refined into perfectly cut, smooth wooden planks. I turned back to the camp. Move everyone out of the center, I commanded. Elias didn't even hesitate. He waved his staff frantically. Move. Clear the center. The Lord of Architecture commands it. Clear the space. The refugees scrambled over the dirt, moving their ragged blankets and sick family members away from the flat area near the infinite water pool. I equipped the oak planks in my hand. To the outside observer, it looked like a perfectly cubic block of refined wood just miraculously materialized in my palm. I aimed at the ground. A faint, black wireframe outline appeared on the dirt, visible only to me. I willed the block to place. Clack. A perfect 1-meter cube of oak wood locked into reality. I aimed next to it. Clack. And again. Clack. I started moving at a full sprint. My hands were a blur of pixelated motion. Clack, 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 clack. I laid down a solid 20 by 20 perimeter of wooden blocks in less than 10 seconds. The refugees watched in absolute, paralyzed silence. Their minds simply could not process what they were seeing. A man was running in a square, and an impenetrable wooden wall was spawning out of thin air behind him. I built the walls 4 blocks high. Then, I aimed at the top edge and began placing the roof. This was the ultimate test of their sanity. As I placed the roof blocks horizontally, extending outward from the walls toward the center, there were no pillars. There were no support beams. I was literally building a ceiling out of solid wood that floated perfectly horizontally in the air. Clack, clack, clack. In exactly 2 minutes, a massive, enclosed wooden hall stood in the middle of the wasteland. It cast a giant, cool, impenetrable shadow over the cracked earth. I had left a wide doorway for them to enter. Get inside, I said, breathing slightly heavy, not from physical exertion, but from the sheer adrenaline of building a Minecraft structure in real life. The refugees slowly crept into the wooden hall. The moment they stepped into the shadow, collective sighs of relief echoed through the space. The blistering heat of the sun was instantly neutralized by the thick wooden blocks. Clara walked along the wall, running her trembling fingers over the perfectly smooth, splinter-free surface of the oak blocks. She looked up at the flat, unsupported ceiling that spanned 20 meters across. This is impossible, she whispered, a tear rolling down her cheek. There is no mortar. There are no nails. The wood should collapse under its own weight. It is perfect. It is absolutely perfect. It will never collapse, I assured her. Not unless I break it. Suddenly, the loud rumbling of a stomach echoed through the quiet hall. It was a young boy, maybe 7 years old, clutching his ribs. He looked up at me with massive, hollow eyes. The water and the shade had saved them from immediate death, but starvation was a slow, creeping executioner. My own hunger bar was now flashing at 4 drumsticks. My health regeneration was officially paused. We are safe from the sun, Elias wheezed, sitting against the wooden wall. But we have not eaten in a week. My lord, the land is barren. There are no animals to hunt. The soil is dead. The soil is only dead because you don't know how to ask it for life, I replied. I walked out of the wooden hall and stepped back into the blazing sun. I looked at the patches of dead, brown wasteland shrubs scattered across the dirt. I walked over to one and punched it. The shrub shattered instantly. Obtained. Wheat seeds X1. I moved rapidly, punching every dead shrub I could find in a 50-yard radius. Within a minute, I had a stack of 12 wheat seeds in my inventory, but I needed tools. I opened my inventory, placed 4 oak planks in a square, and crafted a crafting table. I placed the crafting table on the dirt outside the hall. Clack. I accessed a larger 3x3 grid. I used 2 planks to make 4 wooden sticks, then combined 2 sticks and 2 planks to create a wooden hoe. A simple, pixelated wooden farming tool materialized in my hand. I walked over to the infinite water pool. I equipped the wooden hoe, aimed at the dry, cracked dirt right next to the water, and right-clicked in my mind. Snick. The rock-hard, dead earth instantly transformed into a block of rich, dark, perfectly tilled farmland. Because it was directly adjacent to the water source, the farmland immediately turned a deep, moist brown. Clara stood in the doorway of the hall, her jaw dropping once again. He just turned the deadlands into fertile soil with a wooden stick. I ignored the audience and rapidly tilled a 3x4 grid of dirt around the water. I equipped the wheat seeds and began planting them. Pop. Tiny, pixelated green sprouts appeared on top of the rich soil, but waiting for them to grow would take too long. I needed food right now. I scanned the wasteland again. Just outside the camp's perimeter, there was a pile of bleached white bones, the remains of some large, unfortunate beast that had starved to death years ago. I jogged over to the skeleton and punched a massive femur bone. It shattered, dropping a single bone item into my inventory. I opened my crafting menu, placed the bone in the grid, and instantly converted it into 3 piles of bone meal. I ran back to the freshly planted crops. Clara and Elias were standing right at the edge of the farmland, watching the tiny green sprouts with desperate, starving eyes. They will take months to grow, Arthur, Elias said sadly. We do not have months. In my world, time is relative. I said. I equipped the bone meal in my hand. It looked like a pile of sparkling white dust. I sprinkled it over the first row of wheat sprouts. A burst of green, glowing magical particles erupted from the soil, in the span of a single microsecond. The tiny green sprouts violently shot upward, transforming into tall, golden, perfectly ripe stalks of wheat. Clara shrieked, falling backward onto the dirt. Magic! It's life magic! I didn't stop. I sprinkled the bone meal over the rest of the crops. Green particles exploded into the air, and suddenly, a miniature field of golden, swaying wheat stood in the middle of the dead wasteland. The smell of fresh grain and life filled the dry air, overpowering the scent of dust and death. I punched the fully grown wheat. Pop! I collected the wheat and the extra seeds it dropped. I immediately replanted the seeds, turning the single harvest into a self-sustaining loop. I ran over to the crafting table. I placed 3 pieces of wheat in a horizontal line across the grid. In the output slot, a beautifully baked, golden brown loaf of bread appeared. I rapidly crafted 4 more loaves. The smell of fresh, warm, perfectly baked bread wafted into the wooden hall. The refugees inside let out a collective, desperate groan of hunger. I walked over to Clara. She was still sitting on the ground, staring at the golden wheat field that had not existed 60 seconds ago. I reached out and handed her a loaf of bread. It was warm to the touch. Clara looked at the bread, then looked up at me. Her hands were shaking violently as she brought the loaf to her mouth and took a bite. Her eyes widened. The rich, soft texture of the bread was a stark contrast to the hardtack and dried moss she had survived on for months. She chewed, swallowed, and immediately burst into heavy, uncontrollable tears. It's real, she sobbed, taking another massive bite. It's so warm. It's real food. I handed a loaf to Elias, who took it with both hands, pressing it against his forehead in a gesture of profound prayer before eating. I walked into the hall and began passing the remaining loaves to the starving children and mothers, immediately returning to the field to grow and craft more. Within 10 minutes, I had fed all 50 refugees. Their hollow cheeks seemed to regain color. The desperate, dying atmosphere of the camp was completely eradicated. My own hunger bar was fully restored, all 10 drumsticks glowing brightly. I stood in the center of the wooden hall. 50 people, their stomachs full of fresh bread, their bodies cooled by the shade of an impossible wooden structure, and their thirst quenched by an infinite spring of water, all slowly rose to their feet. Elias stepped forward, leaning on his staff. His cloudy eyes were completely clear, burning with a religious fire. He dropped his staff and fell to both knees. Clara, the fierce, cynical survivor of the wasteland, immediately followed. She dropped to her knees, bowing her head deeply. One by one, every man, woman, and child in the hall knelt on the wooden planks. Praise be to the Creator. Elias's voice echoed through the massive hall, strong and resonant. Praise be to the God of architecture. You have brought the oasis to the apocalypse. I looked at my pixelated hotbar, the wooden hoe in my hand, and the infinite possibilities of the world at my fingertips. I was not just going to survive in this wasteland. I was going to conquer it. The peace I had bought with fresh bread and infinite water lasted less than 3 hours. I was sitting on a wooden chest I had recently crafted, mentally organizing my inventory, when the wooden hall's heavy doors were suddenly thrown open. Clara scrambled inside, her chest heaving as she gasped for breath. Her green eyes were wide, dilated with a cold, paralyzing terror that instantly put me on high alert. Dust on the horizon, she panted, clutching her side. To the north, it is a war party, at least 20 riders, maybe 25. They are riding Desert Runner's mutated scale hides. I saw their banner. It's the Iron Fangs. Elias, who had been resting peacefully near the water pool, pushed himself up with a groan. His face went entirely pale. Brody's men, he whispered, his voice trembling. They are a splinter faction of Clayton Thorne's syndicate. They are murderers. Arthur, they don't just tax villages, they strip them bare, take the young into chains, and leave the rest to the vultures. If they find this water, if they smell the bread, they will kill us all to keep the secret for themselves. Clara finished, her hand instinctively drifting to the empty sheath at her hip. Her spear was outside, leaning against the oak wall, but she knew a simple rusted spear would do nothing against 25 armored raiders. I stood up, adjusting the hem of my shirt. How long do we have? 30 minutes, Clara said, her voice cracking. Maybe less. They are moving fast. The scent of fresh water in a dry land carries a long way, and our cooking fire from the bread must have given away our position. I looked at my hotbar. I had a wooden hoe, a few leftover loaves of bread, some oak planks, and a single block of dirt. If I tried to fight 25 mounted, battle-hardened bandits with a wooden farming tool, they would paint the oak walls of my new hall with my blood. I needed a defense. Something heavy. Something completely immune to primitive steel swords and rusted spears. I closed my eyes and searched my mental crafting recipe book. My mind cataloged the structures, the weapons, the defensive units, and then, I saw it. Iron Golem recipe. 4 blocks of iron arranged in its shape, with one carved pumpkin on top. My heart skipped a beat. An iron golem. A massive, walking fortress of pure metal. It possessed nearly 100 health points. Immune to fall damage, and capable of hurling grown men 30 feet into the air with a single swing of its massive, piston-like arms. But the resource requirements were staggering for a man standing in the middle of a barren desert. 4 blocks of iron. In Minecraft, 1 iron block required 9 solid iron ingots. 4 blocks meant I needed exactly 36 iron ingots. Plus, I needed a pumpkin and a pair of shears to carve it. Elias, I said, my voice cutting through the panic in the room. Do your people have any metal? Rusted chains? Broken pots? Dented shields? Scrap iron? Anything. I need every single scrap of iron you possess. Now, Elias blinked, confused. But my status as their savior carried absolute authority. Yes. We salvaged whatever we could carry from our old village. Clara. Get the storage crates. Within minutes, the refugees were dragging heavy, rotting leather sacks into the wooden hall. They dumped the contents onto the floor. It was a pathetic collection. Fractured iron cauldrons, heavy rusted chains used for drawing dry wells, old plowshares, and bent iron daggers. I knelt down and touched the metal pile. A small pop-up appeared in my vision. Smeltable iron scrap estimated yield. 34 iron ingots. Close. But not enough. I needed 36. Plus an extra 2 for a pair of shears to carve the head. I needed 38 iron ingots in total. Is this everything? I asked. Looking up at the anxious crowd, the refugees looked at each other, silent and despairing. Then, a young mother stepped forward, her hands shaking as she reached around her neck. She unclasped a heavy, tarnished iron locket. My grandmother's, she whispered, her voice breaking. It is solid iron. Will this help, Lord Arthur? I took the locket. The system registered it instantly. Smeltable iron locket yield. 4 iron ingots. It is perfect, I told her, giving her a reassuring nod. It will save us. I turned toward the back corner of the wooden hall. I needed to build a furnace. To build a furnace, I needed 8 cobblestone blocks. I didn't have stone. I only had dirt and wood. But stone was always just a few feet beneath the earth. I grabbed my crafting table and placed it on the floor. I quickly converted some oak planks into sticks. Then combined them to craft a wooden pickaxe. A pixelated wooden tool materialized in my grip. Feeling surprisingly sturdy, I walked to the very edge of the wooden floor, punched out one of the oak planks to reveal the dry dirt beneath, and began digging straight down. Thud, thud, thud. I dug through 3 meters of dry, compacted clay. My wooden pickaxe tore through the earth with supernatural speed, far faster than any steel shovel could. On the 4th meter, my pickaxe struck something hard, emitting a sharp, metallic ring. Gray, textured stone, cobblestone. I swung the wooden pickaxe. Clack, 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 pop. A perfect block of cobblestone broke free and floated into my inventory. I mined rapidly, swinging the pickaxe in a steady, hypnotic rhythm. Within 2 minutes, I had cleared a small vertical shaft and harvested exactly 12 cobblestone blocks. I jumped out of the hole, placed the oak plank back over the opening to seal it, and ran to my crafting table. I arranged 8 cobblestone blocks in a hollow square. Clack! A heavy, gray stone furnace materialized in my hands. I placed it right next to the crafting table. I accessed the furnace UI. I placed 3 oak logs into the top slot to convert them into charcoal, using some scrap wood as fuel. The furnace immediately burst into life. A warm, bright orange pixelated fire roaring inside its stone belly. Once the charcoal was ready, I placed it into the fuel slot. Then, I dumped the entire pile of scrap iron and the young mother's locket into the melting slot. A progress bar appeared in my vision, slowly ticking forward. Smelting iron ore scrap. Progress. 1238. They are here. Clara whispered from the doorway. She was looking through a small gap in the oak walls. I can hear the runners. The ground is shaking. I stepped up beside her and looked out. A massive cloud of dust was settling just 50 yards from our wooden hall. Emerging from the haze were 20 of the most vicious-looking men I had ever seen. They rode strange, reptilian beasts with leathery, sand-colored skin and rows of needle-like teeth as it runners. The men were draped in mismatched iron armor plates, their faces hidden behind scrap metal masks or thick leather wraps. They carried heavy iron maces, jagged scimitars, and crude crossbows. At the front of the column rode a man who could only be Brody. He was a giant, easily 6 feet 5 inches tall, with a wild, greasy black beard and a deeply scarred face. A massive, double-bitted steel battle-axe was strapped to his back. Brody pulled the reins of his reptilian mount, staring at the massive, impossible wooden hall that had appeared in the middle of the empty wasteland. His eyes drifted to the pool of crystal-clear water sitting completely exposed in the sun. What in the hell is this? Brody's booming voice carried across the silent desert. He spat onto the dry dirt. A fortress sprouted out of the dirt like a weed. And is that water? One of his scouts rode up beside him, sniffing the air. It's fresh, boss. Real water. Cold, too. I can smell it from here. And there's food. Fresh bread. Brody's scarred face twisted into a greedy Savage grin. Elias and his sheep must have found a hidden oasis. But they built a wooden house to hide it. Idiots. A single torch will burn them out. He drew his massive battle axe, the steel catching the harsh sunlight. Surround the building. If anyone tries to run, cut their legs off. We take the water, we take the food, and we chain the rest. Inside the hall, the refugees began to weep softly. Clara gripped her spear, her knuckles turning white. Arthur, she whispered, her voice trembling. The furnace. Is it ready? I turned back to the furnace. The progress bar had just finished its final tick. Smelting complete. Obtained. 38 iron ingots. We need the head, I said. Where is the gourd? Elias rushed forward, holding a large, dried orange gourd. It was tough as wood, hollowed out and dried by the sun to be used as a lantern. It was roughly the size of a human head. I grabbed my crafting table and placed 2 iron ingots in a diagonal pattern. Clack! A pair of sharp metal shears materialized in my hand. I equipped them, walked over to the dry orange gourd, and performed a carving motion in the air. Snip, snip, with a satisfying sound. A terrifying, jagged face was carved into the front of the gourd. The hollow eyes and a jagged grin looked incredibly sinister. The system registered it instantly. Carved gourd. I took the remaining 36 iron ingots and placed them in the 3x3 crafting grid, filling all 9 slots with 4 ingots each. Clack, 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 clack. 4 solid, heavy, gleaming blocks of iron materialized in my inventory. Each block weighed hundreds of pounds, but to me, they were weightless icon squares in my hotbar. Stay inside, I told Clara and Elias, and watch. I pushed open the heavy oak doors of the hall and stepped out into the blazing desert sun. The moment I stepped out, 25 pairs of eyes locked onto me. Brody looked down from his reptilian mount, his eyes scanning my clean clothes and my completely unarmed posture. He let out a loud, mocking laugh. Well, look what we have here, Brody sneered, resting his heavy battle axe on his shoulder. The chief of the sheep. Tell me, boy, did you build this pretty wooden playhouse? It's a nice toy, but it belongs to the Iron Fangs now. Step aside, and maybe I'll let you live as a waterbill. I didn't answer him. I took a few steps forward, stopping right in the center of the space between the wooden hall and the bandit column. I selected the iron blocks in my hotbar. With a mental command, I placed the first block of iron directly onto the dry earth. Thud. A massive, 1-meter cube of solid, polished iron slammed into the dirt. The ground shook slightly from the immense weight. Brody's laughter cut off. He blinked, his eyes widening as he stared at the massive block of metal that had literally appeared out of thin air. What? What kind of trick is that? I didn't give him time to think. I jumped onto the first block and placed the second block directly on top of it. Thud. Then, I placed 1 block on the left side of the upper block, and another on the right side. Thud. Thud. A perfect, massive shape of solid, gleaming iron stood in the dirt, towering nearly 7 feet high. It was an imposing structure of metal, but to the bandits, it was just a strange, static sculpture. Is this your god? Brody mocked, though his voice carried a hint of nervous hesitation now. You think a pile of scrap metal is going to save you from my steel? Boy, archers, shoot this bastard. 3 bandits raised their crude crossbows and pulled the triggers. Twang, twang, twang. 3 iron-tipped bolts flew through the air, aiming directly for my chest. I didn't even flinch. I simply stepped slightly to the side, allowing the bolts to strike the solid iron shape behind me. Clang, clang, clang. The bolts shattered against the iron blocks, falling harmlessly into the dirt as twisted pieces of scrap. I reached into my inventory and pulled out the carved gourd. The jagged, carved face glowed slightly in the sunlight. I jumped up, hovering in the air for a fraction of a second, and placed the gourd perfectly on top of the center iron block. The moment the gourd locked into place, the laws of the universe bent. A deafening, metallic hum vibrated through the air, so intense that the bandits' reptilian mounts began to screech and thrash in panic. A burst of thick, white steam erupted from the joints of the iron blocks, shrouding the structure in a ghostly mist. Inside the steam, the static blocks began to shift and reform. The solid cubes melted and stretched, locking together with the sound of grinding gears and heavy industrial pistons. The steam cleared. Standing in the dirt was a 7-foot lumbering behemoth of pure, polished iron. Its chest was a massive, solid plate of metal, its long, thick arms hanging nearly to its ankles. Its head was a blocky, metallic shape, dominated by 2 glowing, pupilless red eyes that burned with a cold, mechanical fury. Summoned. Iron Golem Health. 100100 Directive. Protect Creator and Allies. Eradicate threats. The bandits went entirely silent. The sheer, overwhelming pressure radiating from the iron giant was suffocating. It didn't breathe. It didn't make a sound. It just stood there, its red eyes locking onto Brody. What? What is that thing? Brody whispered, his bravado instantly evaporating. His mount thrashed violently, trying to turn and run, but Brody held the reins in a panic. Kill it. Kill it now. 5 bandits surged forward on their runners. raising their scimitars and spears. They slammed into the Iron Golem, their steel blades striking its massive metal chest. Clang! Sparks flew into the air. The swords didn't even scratch the polished iron. The spear tips shattered on impact. The Iron Golem didn't even take a step back. Its health bar remained at a perfect 100. Then, the giant moved, with a speed that defied its massive size. The golem swung its long, heavy iron arms upward in a violent, sweeping motion. Crash! The blow caught two of the mounted bandits, and their reptilian beasts. The impact was horrific. The sheer force of the golem's swing hurled both riders and their multi-ton mounts 30 feet into the air. They flew backward, screaming, before crashing into the hard desert dirt with a sickening crunch of breaking bones. They didn't get back up. By the gods! A bandit screamed, turning his mount to flee. But the golem was relentless. It took a massive, heavy step forward, the ground shaking beneath its metal feet. It grabbed a third bandit straight off his mount with one hand, lifting him like a ragdoll, and slammed him face first into the dry earth with the force of a falling meteor. The desert was filled with the sounds of screaming men, snapping bones, and the heavy, terrifying clang-clang-clang of the golem's footsteps. It was a massacre. The Iron Fangs, the feared raiders of the wasteland, were being systematically crushed into red paste by a single, indestructible metal giant. Brody watched his men die in seconds, his face completely pale with terror. He realized he was next. In a desperate, suicidal frenzy, he leaped off his mount, raising his massive steel battle-axe with both hands. He charged the golem from behind, channeling all his strength into a final, crushing blow aimed at the giant's neck. Die, you metal freak! Brody roared. The battle-axe struck the golem's neck with a deafening crack. The steel head of Brody's prized battle-axe shattered into a dozen jagged shards. The golem slowly turned its head, its glowing red eyes locking onto the trembling bandit leader. The golem raised its massive, piston-like fist. Bam! The punch caught Brody squarely in the chest. He was launched backward, crashing into the dirt, rolling 50 feet through the dust before coming to a halt. His chest was caved in, his eyes wide and lifeless, staring blankly at the pale sky. The remaining 4 bandits didn't even try to fight. They threw their weapons into the dirt, turned their mounts, and fled into the desert, riding as fast as their beasts could carry them. The golem did not pursue them. It stood in the center of the battlefield, surrounded by the bodies of the fallen raiders. It let out a soft, low metallic hum, its long arms swaying slightly. The heavy oak doors of the hall slowly slid open. Clara, Elias, and the 50 refugees stepped out onto the sand. They stared at the dead bandits, then at the towering iron giant, and finally at me. The silence of the desert was absolute. Then, Elias fell to his knees, his hands raised to the heavens. The iron giant, the protector of the Lord, he commands the metals of the earth. He is the god of the forge, the god of the forge. The refugees chanted, throwing themselves onto the ground in absolute worship. I looked at the Iron Golem, then down at my own hands. Brody was dead. The iron fangs were broken, but I knew this was just the beginning. The bandits who escaped would run straight back to Clayton Thorne, and eventually, to the corrupt Governor Silas Mercer. They would come with a larger army. They would come with siege weapons. I looked at my hotbar, my eyes narrowing. Let them come. I had an infinite source of water, a fortress of wood, and an iron guardian, but I was going to need more. I was going to need diamonds, and to get them, I had to dig much, much deeper. The bodies of the Iron Fangs were dragged away and buried far from the camp, to my system. Their discarded armor and weapons were nothing more than raw materials. I gathered every jagged scimitar, heavy mace, and dented iron breastplate they left behind. When I tossed them into my stone furnace, the roaring pixelated fire melted the crude bloodstained steel down into 50 pristine iron ingots. I was wealthy by the standards of this desperate world, but the mood inside the massive oak hall was anything but celebratory. Clara paced nervously near the infinite water pool, her boots clicking against the smooth wooden planks. Brody was a monster, Arthur, but he was just a scavenger, a bottom feeder, she said, her voice tight with anxiety. The men who escaped will not go back to their desert hideouts. They will run straight to the border garrison. They will tell Governor Silas Mercer. Elias, sitting on a wooden bench I had crafted earlier, nodded slowly, his ancient eyes filled with a deep, lingering dread. Mercer is the hand of the king in these wastelands. He controls the silver mines, the trade routes, and an army of 3,000 professional soldiers. If he learns that a man in the desert possesses an infinite spring of water and fields of golden wheat that grow in seconds, he will not send scavengers. He will send a legion. Let him send them, I said calmly, arranging my hotbar. You do not understand, Clara snapped, stopping her pacing to look at me. Your iron giant is incredible, Arthur. It crushed 20 men. But Mercer has siege ballistas that fire steel bolts the size of tree trunks. He has alchemists who throw glass jars of liquid fire. He will burn this wooden hall to the ground and slaughter everyone inside just to claim the water pool. Before I could answer her, a sharp, piercing sound echoed across the wasteland. It was the blast of a polished brass war horn. Clara froze, the color draining entirely from her face. They are already here. I walked to the heavy oak doors and pushed them open. The blinding midday sun washed over me, standing about 50 yards away, completely ignoring the scattered bloodstains from yesterday's massacre. Was a highly organized envoy. Unlike the ragtag bandits, these men were soldiers. There were 50 of them, mounted on armored warhorses. They wore pristine, matching silver breastplates adorned with the crest of a black vulture, the sigil of Governor Silas Mercer. At the center of the formation was a heavily gilded, enclosed carriage drawn by 4 massive beasts. The carriage door opened, and a man stepped out. He did not look like a warrior. He wore a lavish silk tunic, heavy velvet robes that seemed entirely inappropriate for the desert heat, and a sneer of profound arrogance. He was flanked by 2 massive knights carrying tower shields and heavy halberds. I stepped out of the hall. Behind me, the Iron Golem, which had been standing dormant in the shade, rotated its massive head. Its red eyes flared to life with a mechanical hum, and it took a heavy, earth-shaking step forward to stand at my shoulder. The envoy halted, his eyes sweeping over the perfectly geometric oak hall, the towering iron giant, and finally settling on me. He pulled a rolled parchment from his robes. I am Magistrate Vane, speaking with the absolute authority of Governor Silas Mercer, the man announced, his voice magically amplified by a small crystal on his collar so it echoed across the desert. Word has reached the capital of a miraculous oasis. By the decree of the Crown and the Governor, all natural resources, magical anomalies, and unsanctioned fortresses within the Deadlands are the exclusive property of the state. He rolled up the scroll and pointed a gloved finger at me. You, the rogue magic user, are hereby drafted into the Governor's servitude. Your water, your crops, and your metal construct will be surrendered immediately. Refuse, and the full might of the royal army will march upon this location and execute every man, woman, and child inside that wooden abomination. Clara stood in the doorway behind me, her breathing shallow. The refugees huddled in the shadows, terrified. I looked at Magistrate Vane, then I looked at his 50 armored guards. They were disciplined, but I could see the horses nervously shuffling their hooves, their eyes rolling wildly as they stared at the Iron Golem. I didn't yell. I didn't amplify my voice. I just spoke with the calm, unshakable certainty of a man who controlled the very coding of the world. This land does not belong to Mercer, I said. It does not belong to your king. The dirt, the water, and the sky above it belong to me. Go back and tell Mercer that if he sends his army here, I will bury them so deep the worms won't even find them. Magistrate Vane's face turned violently red. You arrogant peasant. You think one metal puppet can stop the royal army? We will burn you alive. I didn't respond with words. I simply looked at the Iron Golem and pointed at the gilded carriage. The golem moved. It did not walk. It surged forward with terrifying mechanical acceleration. The 50 armored knights drew their swords, shouting commands. But the golem ignored them completely. It waded through the horses like a man walking through tall grass. A knight thrust his halberd at the golem's chest. The weapon snapped in half like a dry twig. The Iron Golem reached the carriage. Vane screamed, falling backward into the dirt. The giant raised both of its massive, piston-like fists and brought them down on the gilded carriage. Crash! The impact sounded like a bomb detonating. The solid oak and steel-reinforced carriage was instantly pulverized into a flat, splintered pancake of debris. The horses broke their harnesses and bolted into the desert in sheer terror. The golem slowly turned its head, its glowing red eyes locking onto Magistrate Vane, who was now crawling backward in the dirt, sobbing hysterically. Get out of my territory! I called out. The knights didn't wait for Vane's orders. They spurred their panicked horses, turning and galloping frantically back toward the northern horizon. Vane scrambled to his feet, abandoning his ruined carriage, and ran after them, his silk robes dragging in the dust. I watched them disappear into the heat haze. The golem lumbered back to my side, resuming its silent, towering vigil. Clara stepped out of the hall, her eyes wide. Arthur, you just declared war on the most powerful man in the province. He will bring thousands of men. He will bring fire. I know, I said, turning back toward the wooden hall. Wood burns, iron bends. If we are going to fight an army, we need something that does neither. I need the bones of the earth. I walked back inside, heading straight for the corner where my crafting table and furnace sat. I had 46 iron ingots left. I used 3 to craft an iron pickaxe, a sleek, sturdy tool that gleamed with pixelated perfection. I used more iron to craft a sturdy iron sword and an iron shield, equipping them to my inventory slots. I also converted my remaining wood into a massive stack of torches, using the charcoal I had burned earlier. Clara, I said, looking at the fierce warrior, keep the refugees inside the hall. Let the golem guard the door. I am going down. Down? Elias asked, leaning on his staff. Down where, my lord? To the bottom of the world, I replied. I walked to the very center of the oak floor. I punched out a wooden plank, revealing the dry earth below. I equipped my iron pickaxe. In Minecraft, digging straight down was the #1 rule you never broke, because you could fall into lava or a deep ravine. But I didn't care. I needed resources. And I needed them fast. I started swinging. Clack, clack, clack. The iron pickaxe tore through the earth with terrifying speed. 1 block, 2 blocks, 3 blocks. I dug a rapid staircase downward, moving deeper and deeper into the crust of the earth. The sunlight from the hall above quickly faded into absolute darkness. I placed a torch on the wall. The warm, flickering orange light illuminated the perfectly square height tunnel I was carving. Clack, clack, clack. 10 meters down, the dry clay gave way to solid, gray cobblestone. I harvested dozens of blocks, my inventory rapidly filling up. 30 meters down, the temperature began to drop, the air growing incredibly cold and damp. The sounds of the surface were completely gone, replaced by the eerie, oppressive silence of the underground. Occasionally, I could hear the faint, echoing drip of subterranean water. 50 meters down, my pickaxe struck something that wasn't gray stone. It was a block embedded with shiny, black chunks. Mined, coal ore, obtained, coal X1, EXP1. I mined the entire vein, gathering 20 pieces of pure coal. I used it to craft more torches and kept digging. I was entering the deep underground now. The gray stones slowly began to transition into something much darker, much harder, deep slate. The blocks were pitch black, dense, and required twice as many strikes to break, even with an iron pickaxe. 70 meters down. Suddenly, my pickaxe broke through the wall, and I didn't hit another block. I hit open air. I carefully stepped forward, placing a torch on the floor. I had breached a massive underground ravine. It was a breathtaking, terrifying sight. The cavern was easily 100 meters long and 50 meters deep, completely untouched by human eyes. Massive stalactites hung from the ceiling like jagged teeth. Far below, at the very bottom of the ravine, I could see the glowing, bubbling orange light of a massive lava pool. The heat radiating upward was intense, carrying the smell of sulfur and burning rock. This was the domain of monsters. This was the deep dark. I carefully built a staircase of cobblestone along the wall of the ravine, descending toward the lava level. In my old world, the best resources spawned near the highest concentrations of heat and depth. As I reached the bottom, standing just a few feet away from a bubbling lake of magma, I saw it. Embedded in the dark deep slate wall to my right was a block glowing with a faint, pulsing crimson light. It looked like veins of blood frozen in the rock, humming with a strange, electrical energy. I swung my pickaxe. Clack, clack, pop. The block shattered, dropping a pile of glowing red dust into my inventory. Mined, redstone dust X4, EXP5. I stared at the red powder in my hand. In this fantasy world, redstone wasn't just a mechanical component. It pulsed with raw, untamed magic. It was a conductor of kinetic energy, capable of powering impossible machines. If Mercer was bringing siege weapons, I was going to build automated traps that would make his ballistas look like children's toys. I mined the entire vein, securing over 40 pieces of redstone dust. But I wasn't done. I wiped the sweat from my forehead, the intense heat of the lava baking my skin. I moved along the edge of the magma lake, keeping my eyes locked on the dark walls. I needed the ultimate prize. 10 minutes later, hidden in a dark alcove just barely illuminated by the orange glow of the lava, I found it. It was a vein of 3 blocks. They did not glow like redstone, but they caught the faint light and refracted it into a brilliant, piercing cyan blue. The sheer beauty of the gems embedded in the dark stone was hypnotizing. I took a deep breath, my heart hammering against my ribs. I raised my iron pickaxe and struck the block. Clack, clack, pop. A flawless, perfectly cut blue gemstone floated into the air and deposited itself into my inventory. Mined, Diamond X1. EXP 50 achievement unlocked. Diamonds. You have acquired the strongest base material in the universe. I frantically mined the remaining 2 blocks. 3 diamonds. I opened my inventory and looked at the 3 cyan gems sitting in the slot. To the kings and emperors of this world, a single diamond of this size and purity would be worth a kingdom. It would be placed in a crown and worshipped. But to me, it was just the first piece of my armor. I needed 24 diamonds for a full set of armor, plus 3 for a pickaxe and 2 for a sword. I needed more, much more. I gripped my iron pickaxe, the heat of the lava reflecting in my eyes, and turned back to the dark stone walls. Mercer was assembling his army on the surface. Let him take his time, because by the time his legion marched on my wooden hall, they wouldn't be facing a man with a wooden hoe. They would be facing an invincible god encased in blue diamond. I raised my pickaxe and plunged deeper into the dark. The blistering heat of the subterranean magma lake baked the sweat onto my skin. But I could not look away from the 3 cyan gems resting in my inventory. 3 diamonds. In the logic of my system, that was exactly enough to shatter the ceiling of what was possible in this world. I immediately dropped my crafting table onto the dark stone floor of the ravine. I placed 3 wooden sticks and the 3 flawless diamonds into the grid. A sharp, crystalline chime echoed through the cavern. A diamond pickaxe materialized in my grip. It was heavier than the iron tool, its handle crafted from compressed oak, but the head was forged from solid, perfectly cut blue diamond. It hummed with a faint, resonant energy, refracting the orange glow of the lava into 1,000 shattered beams of blue light. I turned toward the bubbling lake of magma. If I was going to manipulate the fundamental magic of this universe, I needed the strongest, most resilient block in existence. I needed the black glass that could withstand explosions and contain dimensional rifts. I equipped my iron bucket filled with infinite water. I took a deep breath, stepping to the very edge of the stone embankment, and poured the water directly over the surface of the lava lake. The physical reaction was violently instantaneous. A deafening hiss erupted as the freezing water collided with the molten rock. Thick, blinding white steam exploded upward, filling the cavern with a suffocating fog. The physics engine overwrote the natural laws of thermodynamics in a microsecond. The flowing magma did not just cool down, it instantly solidified into perfectly cubic blocks of pitch black, impenetrable stone, obsidian. I scooped the water back into my bucket, clearing the area where a pool of deadly liquid fire had just been. A solid bridge of dark, glossy obsidian now rested. I stepped onto the black blocks. They were cold to the touch, absorbing the ambient light like a void. I raised my diamond pickaxe and struck the surface. Even with the strongest tool in the world, mining obsidian was a grueling process. The diamond head slammed against the black glass, sparking violently. It took nearly 10 full seconds of relentless swinging before a web of white cracks finally shattered the block. With a deep, satisfying pop, the obsidian block floated into my inventory. I spent the next 10 minutes mining, securing 14 blocks of obsidian, 4 for my immediate needs, and 10 to store away for something far more ambitious down the line. But I was not done with the deep dark yet. I moved along the edges of the ravine, my eyes scanning the deep slate walls for the telltale cyan glow. The system rewarded my persistence. In the deepest, darkest corners of the cavern, guarded by the oppressive silence of the underground, I found vein after vein. By the time my wooden pickaxes had completely shattered and my iron pickaxe was heavily worn down, my inventory held 38 flawless diamonds, 50 redstone dust, and several stacks of deep slate and cobblestone. It was time to prepare for war. I rapidly ascended my stone staircase, leaving the suffocating heat of the lava ravine behind. As I climbed higher, the air grew cooler, and the faint orange glow of my torches guided me back to the vertical shaft I had dug beneath the wooden hall. I broke the wooden plank above my head and pulled myself up into the center of the oak floor. The hall was completely silent. The 50 refugees were huddled together in the center, their eyes wide with fear as they stared at the heavy wooden doors. Outside, the Iron Golem stood perfectly still, its red eyes piercing the desert heat. Clara immediately rushed over to me as I brushed the dirt from my jeans. "Arthur, you have been gone for 2 hours. The scouts. They saw dust clouds on the southern horizon. Heavy dust. It is not a raiding party. It is an army march. How long until they reach us?" I asked, my voice calm, completely contrasting the panic in the room. "An hour," Elias wheezed, leaning heavily on his wooden staff. "Maybe less. They will bring siege ballistas, Lord Arthur. They will bring pitch and fire. This wooden hall is a miracle, but it will burn like a torch when the flaming bolts strike it." "I know," I said. "That is why we are no longer going to live in a wooden hall." I walked over to Elias. "I need a book. Do you have anything with pages? A ledger, an old journal, a map drawn on leather, anything?" Elias blinked, entirely confused by the request in the face of imminent destruction. He reached into his tattered robes and pulled out a small, heavy book bound in cracked animal hide. "This is the lineage record of our dead village. The pages are made of pressed reeds, but it is old and useless now." "It is exactly what I need," I said, taking the book from his trembling hands. I walked over to my crafting table. The refugees watched me in silent desperation. I placed the lineage book in the top center slot of the crafting grid. I placed 2 flawless blue diamonds on either side of it. Finally, I placed 4 blocks of dense, black obsidian in an inverted T shape at the bottom. The moment the recipe was complete, the crafting table began to violently shake. A pulse of deep, vibrating purple energy blasted through the wooden hall, knocking the breath out of everyone in the room. Clara gasped, taking a step back as the air grew thick with static electricity. Sitting on the crafting table was the enchanting table. It was a beautiful, terrifying object. Its base was forged from pure obsidian, draped with a cloth of crushed red velvet. But the most impossible feature was the book resting on top of it. The book was open, floating a few inches above the obsidian base, slowly rotating on its own. Strange, alien glyphs made of purple light drifted up from the pages, floating into the air like glowing dust before fading away. "Magic," Clara whispered, falling to her knees. "True, ancient magic." I stepped up to the floating book. I had mined hundreds of blocks of stone, coal, redstone, and diamonds. My internal experience bar had filled up completely, sitting at a glowing level 30. I had the raw magical energy required to rewrite the properties of my weapons. But first, I needed the weapons. I opened my standard crafting grid. I took 24 diamonds and arranged them in the shapes of a helmet, a chest plate, leggings, and boots. One by one, the pieces of diamond armor materialized in my inventory. They did not look like the pixelated blocks from a computer screen. They translated into this reality as masterfully forged. Interlocking plates of solid cyan crystal. They were lighter than steel but harder than dragon scales. I equipped the armor. A flash of blinding blue light engulfed my body. When the light faded, I stood in the center of the wooden hall. Encased entirely in gleaming diamond armor, the crystal plates shifted silently as I moved, offering perfect mobility and absolute protection. I looked like a deity of war forged from the core of a star. Elias openly wept at the sight. Burying his face in his hands, I pulled out 2 more diamonds and a stick, crafting a flawless diamond sword. The blade was a meter long, translucent, and incredibly sharp. Catching the purple light of the enchanting table, I placed the diamond sword onto the floating book of the enchanting table. The purple glyphs instantly swirled around the blade like a vortex of glowing letters. The system offered me 3 choices. I selected the bottom tier, pouring 30 levels of pure experience into the weapon. With a sound like shattering glass, the sword absorbed the purple runes. The blade now pulsed with a violent, shimmering violet aura. Enchantment applied. Sharpness 4. Unbreaking 3. Fire aspect 2. I took the sword. It was no longer just a sharp piece of crystal. It was a weapon of mass destruction. The blade emitted a faint heat. Desperate to ignite whatever it struck, I quickly placed my diamond chestplate on the table and enchanted it as well. Enchantment applied. Protection 4. Thorns 2. I was ready. I was virtually invincible to any physical weapon this world could throw at me. But the refugees were not. Elias, I said, my voice echoing slightly from behind my diamond visor. Tell everyone to move to the very center of the room. Do not touch the walls. Do not step outside. Clara stood up, looking at the glowing purple sword in my hand. Arthur, what are you going to do? I am going to build a castle, I replied. I pushed the heavy oak doors open and stepped out into the blinding wasteland sun. The Iron Golem turned its massive head to look at me, its mechanical programming recognizing the diamond armor as an upgrade to its creator. I looked at the horizon. Clara was right. A massive wall of brown dust was rising into the sky just a mile away. Through the haze, I could see the glint of thousands of steel spears and the massive, lumbering wooden frames of siege ballistas. Governor Silas Mercer had not taken my threat lightly. He had brought the full weight of his garrison to crush me. They thought they were coming to burn a wooden shack. I opened my inventory. I had hundreds of cobblestone blocks from my descent into the ravine. I immediately deployed 5 furnaces in a row on the dirt. I threw the cobblestone inside, fueled them with coal, and watched the progress bars fly. In minutes, the jagged cobblestone was melted down and refined into smooth stone blocks. I threw the stone blocks into my crafting table, refining them even further into massive, perfectly cut stone bricks. I selected the stone bricks in my hotbar. I ran to the corner of the wooden hall. I aimed at the oak blocks. Clack, 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 clack. My hands moved faster than the human I could process. I ran around the perimeter of the 50-foot wooden building, placing stone bricks directly over the oak walls, encasing the flammable wood in 2 meters of solid, impenetrable stone. I built the walls up, extending them 5 meters higher than the original roof, creating a massive, flat parapet for archers. But a stone building was not a fortress. A fortress needed a perimeter. I sprinted 30 yards away from the main building. I began placing stone bricks directly onto the dry dirt. Clack, 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 clack. I sprinted in a massive square, enclosing the building, the infinite water pool, and a large courtyard in a solid stone wall. The wall was 3 meters thick and 15 meters high. I moved like a blur of cyan light, jumping up the blocks, defying gravity, placing massive stone bricks in mid-air without mortar or scaffolding, to the scouts of the approaching army who were watching through spyglasses. It must have looked like the earth itself was erupting into a geometric mountain. I finished the outer wall in under 10 minutes. I left a single, massive opening at the front for a gate. But walls could be scaled with ladders. I needed a deterrent. I equipped my diamond pickaxe. I jumped down outside the main wall and began digging a trench, because I was using a diamond tool. The dirt and clay exploded out of the ground like water. I ran around the entire perimeter of the fortress, carving a moat that was 10 meters wide and 5 meters deep. A dry moat was useless, and I did not want to use my infinite water. I wanted something that would make a royal army turn around and run. I opened my inventory and equipped my iron bucket. But this bucket was not filled with blue water. Before I left the ravine, I had scooped up a single bucket of glowing, bubbling magma. I stood at the edge of the deep trench. I tilted the bucket. The thick, orange liquid fire poured out, hitting the bottom of the trench. The physics engine took over. The lava spread out, flowing like a thick syrup, glowing with a terrifying, searing heat. I ran to the opposite corner of the moat and poured a second bucket. The 2 flows of magma met in the center. The moment they touched, the physics engine calculated the volume and flattened the liquid. The entire 10-meter wide moat instantly filled to the brim with bubbling, spitting, infinite lava. The heat radiating off the moat was so intense it warped the air, creating a shimmering mirage of absolute death around the fortress. I stood in the single gap of the moat, where the dirt formed a natural bridge leading to the open gates of the stone fortress. I looked behind me. The refugees had stepped out of the wooden hall, which was now entirely encased in a massive stone keep. They stood in the courtyard, staring at the towering stone walls and the glowing orange light of the lava moat reflecting against the sky. They were completely speechless, their minds completely shattered by the sheer scale of what I had done in 15 minutes. I turned back to the horizon. The dust cloud had settled. 3,000 men of the royal army stood in perfectly organized ranks just 500 yards away. They were clad in heavy steel plate armor, or carrying tower shields and halberds. Behind the infantry lines were dozens of massive wooden siege ballistas, loaded with steel bolts the size of tree trunks. At the center of the army, riding a massive armored warhorse, was a man draped in a lavish red cape, Governor Silas Mercer. The army was completely silent. They had marched to burn a wooden shack. Instead, they found themselves staring at a towering, impossible castle of perfectly cut stone, surrounded by a moat of liquid fire that had not been there an hour ago. Mercer stared at the fortress, his face pale, his mind unable to process the architectural impossibility before him. I drew my diamond sword. The purple runes on the blade flared to life, bursting into actual flames due to the fire aspect enchantment. I stood alone on the dirt bridge, the towering Iron Golem stepping up to stand silently at my side. I raised the burning purple blade and pointed it directly at the army of 3,000 men. The siege had begun, and they were already entirely outmatched. The silence stretching between my towering stone fortress and the royal army of 3,000 men was heavy enough to crush a weaker man. The dry desert wind whipped my hair, but beneath my enchanted diamond helmet, I felt nothing but a cool, calculating focus. Beside me, the Iron Golem stood like an immovable monument, its long arms hanging still, its glowing red eyes locked onto the massive formation of steel-clad soldiers. Up on the newly constructed stone parapets, Clara and Elias stood with a handful of the braver refugees. They had crude bowstrings pulled tight, but their hands were shaking. They knew as well as I did that 50 starving peasants with wooden bows could do nothing against the disciplined, heavily armored legion. Governor Silas Mercer sat astride his massive, barbed warhorse. The red velvet of his cape billowed in the wind, contrasting sharply with the bleak, gray-brown desert. He stared at my fortress. His eyes darted from the 15-meter-high stone walls to the bubbling, spitting trench of pure orange lava that completely encircled us. "This is madness," Mercer muttered, his voice carrying over the quiet sands. He raised a hand, and his second-in-command, a scarred knight in black steel armor named Captain Briggs, rode up beside him. "Briggs, what am I looking at? My scouts told me there was a wooden shack here. This is a fully fortified castle. How did they raise a keep in a single morning?" I do not know, Your Grace," Briggs stammered, his eyes wide with disbelief as he stared at the shimmering heat rising from the lava moat. "It defies all logic. The stone is too perfect. There are no mortar lines. And that moat, it is liquid fire. No alchemist in the capital has the power to summon a river of magma of this size." Ucker's face hardened, his greed quickly overriding his caution. He was a man who had climbed to power through brutality and cunning, and he was not about to let a single wizard in blue armor turn him back. "It is an illusion," Mercer declared, his voice rising so his men could hear him. "An elaborate trick of light and air, summoned by a desperate rogue magic user. They want us to flee from shadows. Captain Briggs, order the ballistas to open fire. Let us see if his stone walls can withstand royal iron." Briggs turned and bellowed the order. "Siege line, aim for the central keep. Release." 10 massive wooden ballistas, built from heavy ironwood and reinforced with thick steel bands, groaned as their winches were released. With a series of deafening cracks, 10 steel-tipped bolts, each the size of a young pine tree, tore through the sky. They screamed through the air, heading directly for the stone parapets where I stood. "Arthur!" Clara screamed, ducking behind the battlements. I didn't move. I stood perfectly still, my flaming diamond sword resting against my shoulder. The bolts struck the stone brick walls. Clang, clang, clang. In this world, a siege bolt of that size would have shattered ordinary mortar and sent stone flying in deadly shards. But the physics of my system were absolute. A stone brick block in Minecraft has a specific blast resistance and hardness. It does not chip. It does not crack. It either breaks complete, ly when subjected to sustained, high-level mining force, or it remains entirely undamaged. The massive steel bolts struck the smooth stone blocks and bounced off, clattering harmlessly into the lava moat below, where they instantly dissolved into ash. The stone walls did not have a single scratch on them. A collective gasp rippled through the royal army. The archers and infantrymen shuffled their feet, their confidence visibly shattering. How is that possible?" Mercer whispered, his knuckles turning white as he gripped his reins. "Not even a dent." "I told you, Mercer," I called out, my voice easily cutting through the wind. "This land belongs to me. Your weapons have no power here. Do not mock me, peasant," Mercer roared, his face twisting in rage. "Infantry, Prepare the assault bridges. We will cross that trench of fire and tear his castle down stone by stone. A group of 300 elite vanguard soldiers, carrying heavy iron tower shields and pulling massive oak assault bridges on iron wheels, stepped forward. The bridges were designed to span wide trenches, reinforced with wet animal hides to prevent them from catching fire. They believed they could lay the wood over the lava and charge across, but they did not understand the nature of infinite lava. As the vanguard pushed the heavy oak bridges toward the edge of the moat, the sheer, radiant heat of the magma began to take its toll. The wet hides dried out, curled, and burst into flames in seconds. Before the wooden structures could even touch the opposite bank, the intense heat ignited the solid oak beams. Whoosh! 3 of the assault bridges erupted into massive columns of fire, forcing the soldiers to drop the ropes and scramble backward, their eyebrows and hair singed by the blistering heat. It's too hot, a lieutenant screamed. The wood is catching fire before we can even place it. We cannot cross. Then find another way, Mercer yelled, his arrogance turning into a desperate, chaotic fury. There is a land bridge. Look there, in front of the gate. There is a path of dry earth. He pointed his sword toward the single, 10-meter wide gap in the lava moat directly in front of my iron-reinforced gate. It was a natural bottleneck, a perfect dirt path left open for entry. Captain Briggs looked at the narrow path, his tactical instincts screaming at him that it was a trap. Your Grace, it is a bottleneck. If we pack our men onto that narrow bridge, they will be completely exposed to archer fire. Look at their walls, Briggs, Mercer hissed, pointing at the parapets. They have 50 peasants with wooden bows. Our steel shields can block their pathetic arrows all day. Send in the heavy infantry. 500 men, full shield wall. Force the gate. Briggs hesitated, but he knew the penalty for disobeying Mercer was death. He drew his broadsword and raised it. Heavy infantry, form shield wall. Advance onto the land bridge. Double time. A massive block of 500 heavily armored infantrymen, clad in interlocking steel plate and carrying massive rectangular tower shields, marched forward. They aligned their shields, creating an impenetrable roof of steel over their heads. They looked like a giant, metal-scaled beast slowly crawling toward my gate. They stepped onto the dirt bridge. Step, step, step. Up on the wall, Clara raised her bow, her teeth clenched. Arthur, they are crossing. We have to shoot. Save your arrows, Clara, I said, a cold smile forming behind my diamond visor. They are stepping exactly where I wanted them to. Before the army had even arrived, I had spent 30 minutes preparing the entrance to my fortress. I had not just built walls. I had automated my defense. Beneath the thin layer of sand on the land bridge, I had placed exactly 12 stone pressure plates. These plates were wired with glowing lines of redstone dust that ran through the dirt, tunneling directly beneath the stone walls to a hidden chamber. And in that chamber, packed tightly in rows of 10 or 40 blocks of TNT, during my time in the deep ravine, I had harvested massive deposits of yellow sulfur crystals near the magma. By combining the sulfur with the charcoal from my stone furnaces, I had crafted a highly potent form of gunpowder, combined with the infinite sand of the surrounding desert. I had crafted the ultimate defensive weapon. The vanguard of 500 men was now fully packed onto the narrow land bridge. The center of their formation was directly over the pressure plates. Click! A heavy steel boot stepped directly onto a buried stone plate. Deep beneath the earth, the redstone wire pulsed with a sudden, brilliant crimson light. The magical electrical charge surged through the dirt, instantly activating the 40 blocks of TNT. Inside the hidden chamber, the blocks of TNT began to flash a blinding white, swelling and hissing with a terrifying, rhythmic intensity. SSS. Captain Briggs, standing at the back of the line, heard the strange, sharp hissing sound coming from beneath the dirt. He froze, his eyes darting to the ground. What is that sound? Is that water? He didn't get an answer. The physics of a Minecraft TNT block do not cause a gradual combustion. It is an instantaneous, catastrophic release of kinetic energy that obliterates everything within its blast radius. And 40 blocks detonating simultaneously was enough to shake the very foundations of the valley. Boom! The desert erupted. A massive, blinding column of orange fire and black smoke shot 100 feet into the air, completely vaporizing the land bridge. The shockwave was so immense it shattered the glass visors of the soldiers standing hundreds of yards away. The blast wave hit the main army like a physical hammer, knocking horses to their knees and sending dust swirling in a deafening tempest. The 500 elite infantrymen of the vanguard did not even have time to scream. The sheer force of the explosion shattered their steel shields like thin glass, launching bodies, armor plates, and weapons in every direction. The ground beneath them was completely hollowed out, leaving a massive, smoking crater that instantly allowed the surrounding lava from the moat to pour in, filling the void with a bubbling lake of molten rock. When the smoke cleared, the land bridge was completely gone. Where 500 of Mercer's finest soldiers had stood just seconds ago, there was only a churning pool of orange fire. Not a single man of the vanguard survived. The silence that followed the explosion was absolute, broken only by the bubbling hiss of the lava and the faint, terrified whimpers of the remaining royal soldiers. Up on the parapets, Clara dropped her bow, her jaw hanging open as she stared at the empty, smoking crater. By the Maker, she whispered, her voice trembling. They are all gone, in a single second. Elias fell to his knees, his hands shaking as he touched the stone battlements. It is the wrath of the heavens. He commands the fire of the earth. Across the field, the royal army was in a state of complete, paralyzed terror. The horses were bucking wildly, their riders unable to control them. Dozens of soldiers threw their weapons into the sand, turning and running back toward the capital without waiting for orders. The discipline of the 3,000 men had been utterly annihilated by a single magical explosion. Governor Silas Mercer sat on his horse, his face completely devoid of color. He looked at the smoking crater, then up at me. His hands were shaking so violently he could barely hold his sword. What are you? Mercer whispered, his voice cracking with a terror he had never felt in his entire life. No wizard has this power. No mortal can do this. I took a step forward, standing at the very edge of the stone wall. The purple flames of my diamond sword flickered in the wind, casting a sinister violet glow over my cyan armor. I am the builder of this world, Mercer, I said, my voice echoing across the desert like thunder. And you are standing on my construction site. I turned to the Iron Golem. Open the gate. The golem lumbered down to the courtyard, grabbing the massive iron-reinforced wooden doors and pulling them open. The gate was clear. The bridge was gone, replaced by a pool of bubbling lava. But I did not need a bridge. I jumped. To the horror of the watching army, I leapt from the 15-meter-high stone wall, falling straight toward the hard ground below. A fall from that height would have shattered a normal man's legs. But I was wearing full diamond armor enchanted with protection 4. I hit the ground with a heavy thud, kicking up a small cloud of dust. The impact didn't even make my health bar twitch. I stood up slowly, completely unharmed, and gripped my burning diamond sword with both hands. I looked at the remaining 2,500 soldiers. Now, I said, my voice cold and calm, who is next? The 2,500 soldiers of the royal army stared at me in absolute, breathless silence. I had just dropped from a 15-meter-high wall, landing on the solid earth without bending my knees or taking a single point of damage. Between me and their vanguard was the massive, bubbling lava moat that had completely swallowed their assault force just moments ago. Governor Mercer sat paralyzed on his barbed warhorse, his face a mask of pale horror. He is trapped, Mercer stammered, pointing a trembling finger at me. The bridge is gone. He is on the wrong side of the fire. Archers, volley, turn him into a pincushion. A group of 300 archers snapped out of their shock. They drew their longbows, the heavy strings creaking under the tension, and aimed their steel-tipped arrows high into the sky. Loose, Captain Briggs roared. A massive black cloud of arrows blocked out the sun, raining down upon me with deadly precision. In a normal world, I would have been pinned to the dirt, pierced by 100 shafts of steel. I did not even raise my shield. The arrows struck me like a torrential downpour. Clink, 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 clink. The steel arrowhead slammed into my cyan crystal armor and immediately snapped in half. The protection 4 enchantment flared, emitting a faint, pulsing blue energy field that entirely absorbed the kinetic impact of the volley. Not a single arrow penetrated. They bounced off my helmet, my chest plate, and my boots, raining harmlessly onto the dirt around me. My health bar did not drop a single pixel. The archers lowered their bows, their mouths hanging open. They had just witnessed a man shrug off a concentrated volley of armor-piercing arrows without flinching. My turn, I said. I opened my hotbar and equipped a stack of smooth stone bricks. I sprinted directly toward the edge of the bubbling lava moat. He is trying to drown himself in the fire, a knight yelled, his voice laced with confusion. I did not stop. The moment my boots left the solid dirt, and I was falling over the 10-meter gap of liquid magma. My hands moved with mechanical precision. I aimed the crosshair in my vision just below my feet and rapidly placed the blocks. Clack, 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 clack. To the royal army, it looked like sheer divinity. Solid stone blocks were miraculously appearing out of thin air, locking into reality just milliseconds before my boots touched them. I was literally running across the lava moat on a bridge that was building itself under my feet. Slay him, Mercer screamed, his voice cracking into a high-pitched shriek. Infantry, bring him down. I cleared the moat in less than 3 seconds, stepping off my floating stone bridge and landing directly in front of the royal infantry line. A heavily armored pikeman thrust his long spear directly at my chest, putting all his weight behind the strike. The steel tip struck my glowing diamond chest plate. Crack. The Thorns 2 enchantment instantly activated. A violent, jagged spike of green magical energy erupted from my armor, completely bypassing the physical realm. The kinetic energy of the pikeman's strike was magnified and reflected directly back into his own body. His steel spear shattered into splinters, and the man was violently thrown backward, his ribs visibly caving in from the invisible retaliatory strike. He crashed into his comrades, dead before he hit the ground. What kind of demon is this? A soldier screamed, dropping his shield and backing away. I swung my diamond sword, The violet aura of the sharpness for enchantment left a blinding, glowing trail in the air. The blades sliced through the thick steel tower shields and interlocking plate armor of the front line as if they were made of wet paper. The physical resistance was zero. And then, the fire aspect 2 enchantment took over. Whoosh! The 5 soldiers I had just cleaved through instantly burst into towering pillars of magical, purple fire. Their armor melted to their skin as the unnatural flames consumed them in a fraction of a second. They fell to the ground, reduced to charred ash before they could even utter a sound. Panic spread through the ranks like a plague. I did not stop moving. I charged directly into the heart of the formation. A one-man meat grinder encased in indestructible cyan crystal. A group of 10 swordsmen surrounded me, desperately hacking at my armor with heavy broadswords. Clang, clang. Every time their blades touched me, the thorns enchantment punished them. Green spikes of energy blasted them backward, dislocating their shoulders and shattering their arms. My health bar slightly flickered, dropping by half a heart, but the natural regeneration of a full hunger bar instantly healed it back to 10 full hearts. I was a god among insects. I swung in wide, sweeping arcs. Swish, whoosh. Every swing was a localized catastrophe. Men were cut in half, their weapons cleaved neatly in two, their bodies ignited by the violent purple flames. I was not fighting an army, I was harvesting wheat. I moved with a rhythmic, hypnotic efficiency, entirely detached from the chaos around me. The scent of ozone, burning steel, and charred earth filled the air. Hold the line, Captain Briggs bellowed, spurring his massive warhorse forward. He rode at the head of a wedge of 50 heavy cavalrymen. Their lances were lowered, aimed directly at my back. For the king, trampled the wizard. I heard the thunder of hooves approaching. I slowly turned around, the violet flames of my sword dripping onto the sand. I did not brace for impact. Instead, I sprinted directly toward the charging cavalry. Just before Briggs' warhorse could trample me, I jumped, because I was sprinting. The game engine granted me a massive horizontal and vertical boost. I launched myself 3 meters into the air, completely clearing the lowered lances. While hovering at the apex of my jump, I looked down at Captain Briggs. In Minecraft, hitting an enemy while falling results in a critical strike. A critical strike with a sharpness 4 diamond sword was an apocalyptic event. I brought the blade down with both hands. Crockham. The impact of the critical hit generated a visible shockwave of purple energy that rippled through air. The diamond blade struck Briggs upon his helmet. The enchanted sword cleaved through his solid steel helm, split his heavy breastplate, and completely bisected his warhorse. The explosion of kinetic energy and fire aspect flames blasted the surrounding cavalrymen off their horses. The entire charge was stopped dead in a single, devastating heartbeat. I landed softly on the dirt amidst the crater I had just created. Captain Briggs was gone, reduced to a heap of melted slag and ash. The silence that fell over the battlefield was heavier than the stone walls of my fortress. The remaining 2,000 soldiers stopped moving. Their weapons hung limply in their hands. They looked at the massive, smoldering crater where their elite vanguard had died. They looked at the melted remains of their fiercest captain, and they looked at the lone man standing in the center of the carnage, his blue crystal armor completely unblemished, his glowing sword humming with an endless hunger. A sword dropped onto the dirt, then a shield, then a halberd. Run, a young soldier whimpered, tears streaming down his face. Run, it is the end of days. The discipline of the royal army completely shattered. It was no longer a military formation, it was a stampede of terrified men throwing away their heavy armor to run faster. They scrambled over each other, screaming in absolute terror, fleeing wildly toward the southern horizon. Governor Silas Mercer sat alone on his horse, surrounded by the fleeing remnants of his grand legion. His jaw was hanging open, his eyes twitching in sheer disbelief. His empire of fear and corruption had been dismantled in less than 5 minutes by a single man. I slowly turned my head and locked eyes with Mercer. I took a single step forward. Mercer let out a pathetic, high-pitched scream. He violently kicked his spurs into his warhorse's sides. The beast reared up and bolted, galloping away as fast as its legs could carry it, leaving the governor's lavish red cape trailing in the dust. I did not chase him. I stood in the center of the battlefield, the purple flames of my sword slowly dying down. The entire valley was littered with the discarded weapons and armor of an army that had come to conquer and left in utter humiliation. Up on the stone parapets, Elias, Clara, and the refugees erupted into deafening cheers. They were crying, hugging each other, praising the god of architecture who had saved them from absolute annihilation. I opened my inventory. My diamond sword had barely lost any durability, thanks to the Unbreaking 3 enchantment. My health was completely full. The system was absolute. I sheathed my sword and let out a long breath. It was over. I had secured my territory. I could now expand my fortress, build automated farms, create a kingdom where starvation and fear were things of the past. But as I looked up at the sky, the sense of victory was suddenly ripped away from me. The wind stopped completely. The bright, blinding sun of the desert abruptly flickered, as if a thick, unnatural filter had been dragged across the sky. The temperature plummeted from a blistering heat to a bone-chilling, freezing cold in less than 3 seconds. I frowned, looking toward the northern horizon. Far past my stone fortress, the sky there was not blue. It was not even cloudy. It was simply gone. A massive, sprawling tear in reality was crawling across the heavens. It looked like a cluster of pitch black geometric blocks completely devoid of light or texture. It was eating the sky, replacing the clouds and the sun with an endless, terrifying void. And slowly, agonizingly, the black blocks were descending toward the earth, where the black geometry touched the jagged mountains in the distance. The mountains simply ceased to exist. They did not crumble. They did not explode. They were deleted. A horrific, low-frequency buzzing sound filled my ears, vibrating right through my diamond armor and into my teeth. It sounded like a massive server crashing, a reality engine grinding to a devastating halt. Arthur, Clara screamed from the wall, her voice stripped of the joy from seconds ago, replaced by a primal, apocalyptic dread. Look at the sky. The corruption. It is here. I stared at the sprawling black mass. I had heard Elias mention the void when I first arrived, but I thought it was just a religious metaphor for drought and starvation. I was wrong. The void corruption was real. It was not an army. It was not a magic spell. It was the physical decay of the universe itself. A digital rot that was slowly deleting the world from existence. And it was moving directly toward my fortress. I gripped the hilt of my diamond sword. Mercer and his army were a trivial distraction. The true enemy of this world had just arrived. And it was hungry. The black mass in Isekai'd did not move like a storm. It moved like a digital plague. I stood on the blood-stained dirt of the battlefield, my glowing diamond sword lowered, entirely captivated by the terrifying spectacle unfolding on the northern horizon. The sky was not being covered by clouds. It was being deleted. I watched in absolute silence as a towering, snow-capped mountain peak simply ceased to exist. There was no explosion. There was no crumbling rock or avalanche of debris. 1 second, the mountain was there, standing proud against the pale horizon. The next second, there was only a perfectly square void of absolute, lightless nothingness. The corruption was carving geometric chunks out of the universe, leaving behind a pitch-black abyss that absorbed all light and heat. The air grew unnaturally cold. A horrific, low-frequency buzzing sound vibrated through the earth, bypassing my ears and rattling directly against my skull. It sounded exactly like a computer server grinding to a catastrophic halt. The death rattle of a failing hard drive. The great erasing. A trembling voice whispered behind me. I turned to see Elias and Clara walking slowly out of the open gates of the stone fortress. The refugees had poured out into the courtyard, completely ignoring the scattered weapons of the fleeing royal army. They were all staring at the northern sky, their faces pale, their eyes wide with a profound, existential despair. Elias leaned heavily on his wooden staff, his knuckles white. It has finally reached the Deadlands. We thought we had more time. We thought the desert would slow it down. What is it? I asked, my voice tight. I already knew the mechanical answer. It was a chunk error. The world file was corrupting, but I needed to know how the people of this world understood it. It is the void, Clara said, her voice hollow, stripped of all the fierce warrior spirit she had shown just minutes prior. It started 10 years ago in the far northern kingdoms. At first, they thought it was a dark magical plague, but it does not kill, Arthur. It erases. It swallowed the northern forests, then the Silver Mountains, then the capital city of Oakhaven. Millions of people, just gone, erased from existence. She pointed a trembling finger toward the southern horizon, where Mercer and his army had fled. That is why Governor Mercer is so cruel. That is why he strips our villages of every scrap of food and iron. He is not just a tyrant. He is a terrified coward. He is building a massive fleet of ironclad ships on the southern coast. He intends to load his soldiers and his wealth onto the vessels and sail across the southern ocean, hoping the void cannot cross the deep water. Water will not stop it, I said flatly, my eyes tracking the slow, agonizing descent of the black squares. If it is a foundational decay, it will eat the ocean just as easily as it eats the dirt. It will consume this entire reality until there is nothing left but an empty void. Elias dropped to his knees, tears freezing on his cheeks in the sudden cold. Then it is over. You saved us from starvation, Lord Arthur. You saved us from the steel of the royal army. But no castle of stone can stop the end of the world. We are going to be erased. I looked at my hands. I looked at the flawless cyan crystal of my diamond armor, and the glowing purple runes floating around my sword. No, I said, my voice cutting through the panic with absolute, mechanical certainty. We are not. I opened my mental inventory and stared at the vast grid of items I had collected. If this world was operating on the physics engine of my game, then the void was essentially a world border collapse or a severe chunk corruption. You cannot fight a glitch with a sword. You cannot build a wall to keep out a deleted file. If the physical reality was breaking down, I needed to anchor it. I needed an item of infinite, persistent magical energy that forced the surrounding chunks to remain loaded and immune to decay. I needed a beacon. In my old world, a beacon was a pinnacle endgame item. It projected a massive beam of light into the sky, altering the status of any player within its radius. But here, in a reality bound by these physics. An infinite beam of concentrated life energy would act as a reality anchor. It would stitch the decaying code of the universe back together. I quickly reviewed the crafting recipe in my mind. 3 blocks of obsidian for the base, 5 blocks of glass for the casing. I had the obsidian, and I could easily smelt the desert sand into glass. But the core of the beacon required the rarest, most dangerous item in existence, a nether star. To obtain a nether star, I had to summon the Wither, a horrific, 3-headed undead deity of destruction. And to summon the Wither, I needed soul sand and wither skeleton skulls. Those materials did not exist in this dimension. I sheathed my diamond sword and turned to Clara. How fast is it moving? Clara blinked, stunned by my sudden shift in demeanor. She looked at the creeping black geometry in the sky. It moves slowly. It might take a week for the edge of the void to reach this valley. But Arthur, what does it matter? We cannot fight it. I can, I said, stepping past her and walking briskly back into the courtyard of the stone fortress. I just need the right materials, and they are not in this world. The refugees parted as I walked to the very center of the courtyard, right next to the bubbling lava moat. I opened my inventory and selected the 14 blocks of pitch-black obsidian I had mined from the deep underground ravine. I aimed at the dirt. Clack, 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 clack. I placed 4 blocks of obsidian in a horizontal line on the ground. And I built upward, stacking 5 blocks on the left side, and 5 blocks on the right. Finally, I connected the top with 4 more blocks, completing a massive, monolithic vertical rectangle of black glass. It stood over 5 meters tall, casting a dark, imposing shadow over the courtyard. The refugees stared at the black frame in complete bewilderment. Arthur, what is that? Elias asked, pulling himself up with his staff. It looks like a doorway, but it leads nowhere. It leads exactly where I need to go, I replied. I walked over to my crafting table. I placed a single iron ingot and a piece of sharp flint into the grid. A small, curved steel striker and a piece of flint materialized in my hand. Flint and steel. I walked back to the obsidian frame. I stood before the empty black rectangle, holding the flint and steel in my right hand. Listen to me, I said, turning to address Clara, Elias, and the 50 terrified refugees. The Iron Golem will remain here. It will protect you from any stragglers of Mercer's army. Do not leave the walls of this fortress. I am going to step through this gateway to harvest the heart of a dark god. When I return, I will build a machine that will push the void back into the sky. Before they could process my impossible words, I struck the steel against the flint. A bright orange spark flew from my hand, landing directly inside the bottom edge of the obsidian frame. The reaction was violently instantaneous. A deafening, echoing boom ripped through the courtyard, sounding like a massive pane of glass shattering inside a cathedral. The empty space inside the obsidian frame suddenly ignited, filled with a swirling, hypnotic vortex of glowing purple plasma. The portal cast an eerie, violet light across the stone walls, emitting a low, rhythmic hum that sounded like a million whispering voices crying out from beneath the earth. The air around the portal grew intensely hot, carrying the harsh, suffocating scent of sulfur and burning ash. Clara gasped, taking a step back, her hand instinctively reaching for her empty spear sheath. Maker, protect us. It is a gate to the underworld. Keep the fires burning, I told her, my voice completely steady beneath my diamond helmet. I will be back. I did not hesitate. I turned and stepped directly into the swirling purple vortex. The physical sensation was overwhelming. My vision warped, stretching into a dizzying spiral of violet light. A wave of intense nausea washed over me, accompanied by a sound like a rushing hurricane. The cold desert wind vanished, instantly replaced by a wall of suffocating, blistering heat. When my vision finally cleared, the purple vortex was standing behind me, anchoring me to the world I had just left. But I was no longer in the desert. I stepped forward, my diamond boots crunching against the soft, porous, blood-red stone. I looked out over the sprawling, impossible landscape. Massive oceans of bubbling, spitting orange lava stretched out as far as the eye could see. Huge stalactites of glowing red rock hung from a cavernous ceiling that seemed to go on forever. Thick clouds of red fog drifted through the air, carrying the screams of bizarre, ghastly creatures floating in the distance. I gripped my enchanted diamond sword, the violet flames of the blade reflecting in the dark lava. I was in the nether, and the hunt had begun. The air in the nether was not just hot, it was aggressively, maliciously alive. Every breath I took felt like inhaling coarse sand and lit matches. The sky above was not a sky at all, but a massive, oppressive ceiling of glowing red netherrack, dripping with rivers of molten rock that fell like waterfalls into the sprawling magma oceans below. I stood on the edge of a jagged cliff, my diamond armor reflecting the violent orange glow of the environment. I had barely taken 3 steps away from my obsidian portal when the first shriek echoed through the cavern. It was a sound like a crying infant, magnified 100 times and distorted through a nightmare. I looked up. Floating lazily through the thick red fog was a ghast. It was a massive, ghostly white entity, easily 5 meters across, with a cluster of crying tentacles trailing beneath it. Its eyes were shut tight, weeping tears of pure fire. But as I stepped onto the open cliff, its eyes suddenly snapped open, glowing a furious, burning red. It opened its mouth and unleashed a deafening scream. A massive fireball, blazing with white-hot intensity, shot out of its maw and hurtled directly toward me. I did not run. In my world, projectiles were just another physics equation waiting to be solved. I waited for the fireball to cross the gap. When it was less than 2 meters away, I swung my diamond sword in a perfect upward arc. The flat of my glowing purple blade struck the fireball. Instead of exploding, the fireball instantly reversed its momentum, rocketing back along its exact trajectory. The fireball struck the gas directly in its massive face. A spectacular explosion rocked the cavern. The gas let out a final, agonizing shriek before its physical form shattered into a cloud of white smoke and raining ash. A single white tear, crystallized into a gas tear, dropped into the lava ocean far below. I lowered my sword. 1. I muttered to myself. This world was hostile. But I was the apex predator. I needed to find a nether fortress. The pitch-black wither skeletons I hunted only spawned within the confines of those ancient, cursed structures. I looked across the vast ocean of magma, through the thick heat haze. About 300 yards away, I saw the unmistakable geometric silhouettes of towering, dark red pillars rising out of the lava. I opened my inventory. I had hundreds of cobblestone blocks from my mining expedition in the overworld. I sprinted to the edge of the cliff, aimed at the empty air over the lava, and began to build. My boots slammed against the stone blocks as I rapidly placed them, creating a narrow, floating bridge over the sea of fire. The heat radiating from beneath the 1-block-wide bridge was intense enough to melt iron. But the magical aura of my diamond armor absorbed the extreme temperature, keeping my core perfectly cool. In minutes, I reached the imposing walls of the nether fortress. It was a massive, labyrinthine structure built entirely from nether brick, a material baked in the fires of hell itself. The architecture was brutal, composed of sharp angles, endless corridors, and open-air bridges that offered zero protection from the deadly drops below. I jumped off my cobblestone bridge and landed heavily on the dark red bricks of the fortress. The moment my boots touched the structure, the ambient sound of the cavern changed. The distant bubbling of lava was replaced by the horrific, rhythmic rattling of giant bones. From the shadows of the crossway ahead, they emerged. Wither skeletons. There were 5 of them. They were towering giants, nearly 8 feet tall. Their bones completely charred and blackened like burnt charcoal. They moved with a terrifying, silent speed, their empty eye sockets locked onto me. In their long, skeletal hands, they carried massive stone broadswords that dripped with a dark, necrotic fluid. These were not the fragile white skeletons of the overworld. They were the elite guard of the nether. The lead skeleton lunged at me, swinging its heavy stone sword in a brutal downward chop. I raised my diamond shield. Clang. The impact was immense, forcing me to take a step back. But the block held. I dropped my shield and thrust my diamond sword forward. The sharpness for enchantment flared, and the blade sheared straight through the skeleton's ribcage. The fire aspect flames erupted, but to my dismay, the blackened bones simply absorbed the fire. They were creatures of the nether. Fire meant nothing to them. I twisted the blade and kicked the skeleton backward, shattering its spine. It collapsed into a pile of black dust, dropping a single piece of coal. No skull. The remaining 4 skeletons swarmed me. I swung my sword in wide, sweeping arcs, relying on the sheer kinetic damage of the diamond edge. I shattered the 2nd and 3rd skeletons, turning their bones to powder. But as I swung at the 4th, the 5th skeleton slipped past my guard. Its stone sword grazed my left shoulder, sliding past the edge of my diamond chest plate. It was just a scratch, taking only half a heart of damage. But the physical cut was not the true danger. Instantly, my entire health bar turned pitch black. The hearts began to violently shake, and a freezing, necrotic cold flooded my veins. The wither effect. It was a rotting curse that rapidly drained life force. Ignoring armor entirely, I watched in horror as my black health bar began to plummet. 9 hearts, 8 hearts, 7 hearts. The poison was eating me alive. I severed the head of the skeleton that hit me, then spun around and crushed the final one with the hilt of my sword. The corridor was clear, but my health was still dropping. 6 hearts, 5 hearts. I rapidly opened my inventory, equipped a loaf of golden brown wheat bread, and bit into it. The food restored my hunger bar to maximum, instantly triggering my natural health regeneration. The rapid healing from the food fought a brutal, tug-of-war battle against the decaying curse of the wither effect. My health fluctuated wildly, dropping to 3 hearts, rising to 4, dropping back to 3. Finally, after 10 agonizing seconds, the curse faded. My health bar returned to its bright red color and quickly refilled to 10 full hearts. I let out a heavy breath, wiping a line of cold sweat from my forehead. The nether was completely unforgiving. A single mistake could be fatal. I looked down at the pile of black dust left by the 5th skeleton. Resting in the ash was a large, pitch-black skull. The hollow eyes seemed to stare into my very soul. I picked it up. Obtained. Wither skeleton skull 13. I needed 2 more. For the next hour, I became a phantom of death within the red corridors of the fortress. I hunted the wither skeletons with ruthless efficiency. I learned their attack patterns, using my shield to completely block their necrotic strikes, and punishing them with critical jump attacks. I slaughtered dozens of them, filling my inventory with useless coal and discarded bones. Finally, after shattering my 42nd skeleton, the third black skull dropped onto the nether brick. Obtained. Wither skeleton skull 33. I secured the skulls in my inventory. Half the recipe was complete. Now, I needed the dirt of the damned. I left the fortress. Bridging my way back to the natural netherrack terrain, I navigated through the treacherous cliffs and lava falls until the red stone beneath my feet abruptly transitioned to a sickly, dark brown soil. I had entered a soul sand valley. The air here was freezing cold, a stark contrast to the rest of the nether. The ground was composed of soul sand, a terrifying material that trapped the souls of the dead. As I stepped onto the brown dirt, my movement speed was instantly cut in half. The sand seemed to grip my boots, trying to pull me down. When I looked closely at the texture of the blocks, I could see distorted, screaming faces etched into the dirt. I equipped my diamond pickaxe and quickly mined 4 blocks of soul sand. I did not want to stay in this cursed valley a second longer than necessary. I had the materials. It was time to summon the god of destruction. I could not take the fight back to the overworld. The wither's explosive attacks would instantly vaporize my stone fortress, the infinite water pool, and every refugee hiding inside. I had to kill it here, but fighting a flying, explosive boss over an ocean of lava was a death sentence. I needed an arena. I walked to the base of a massive, solid cliff of netherrack. I equipped my diamond pickaxe and began tunneling directly into the solid wall. I dug a horizontal shaft 20 meters deep, only 2 blocks high and 1 block wide. At the very end of the tunnel, I cleared out a slightly larger room. This was a classic speedrunner tactic. The wither was a flying entity. By spawning it at the end of a narrow, solid tunnel, it would be trapped in the rock, unable to fly out of reach, forcing it to fight me in close quarters where my sword was most effective. I stood in the small chamber at the end of the tunnel. I placed the 4 blocks of groaning soul sand on the floor in a vertical shape. I opened my inventory. My hands were perfectly steady, but my heart was hammering against my ribs. The fate of the entire overworld, the survival of Clara, Elias, and the refugees against the creeping void, depended on the next 60 seconds. I placed the first black skull on the left arm of the soul sand. I placed the second skull on the right arm. I held the final skull in my hand. I took a deep breath, raised my arm, and placed it perfectly in the center. The moment the third skull locked into place, the soul sand transformed. The blocks turned pitch black, fusing together into a skeletal, rib-like structure. The 3 skulls enlarged, their hollow eyes igniting with a blinding, terrifying blue light. The entity began to levitate, floating half a meter off the ground. A horrific, high-pitched screech began to build in the air, growing louder and louder until it felt like my eardrums would burst. The wither was charging up. It was completely invulnerable in this state, absorbing the ambient energy of the dimension. Its health bar appeared at the top of my vision, rapidly filling up to a staggering 300 points. I turned and sprinted back down my narrow tunnel, putting 15 meters of solid stone between myself and the boss. The screech reached its absolute peak. Boom! The birth explosion of the wither was cataclysmic. The shockwave tore through the solid netherrack like it was wet tissue paper. The small chamber I had dug was instantly expanded into a massive crater. Blocks of shattered red stone flew down the tunnel, pinging harmlessly off my diamond shield. The smoke cleared. The wither floated in the center of the crater. It was a terrifying monstrosity of black bones and blue fire, its 3 heads snapping wildly in different directions. It spotted me standing at the end of the tunnel. All 3 heads opened their jaws and fired. 3 glowing, explosive black skulls shot down the tunnel toward me. I raised my shield and braced my boots against the floor. Crash, crash, crash. The explosions shattered the walls of my tunnel, widening the gap. The impact was so intense it pushed me backward, but the shield absorbed the blast damage. I dropped the shield and charged. I sprinted down the remaining length of the tunnel, closing the distance before the wither could fire another volley. I leaped into the air, bringing my glowing diamond sword down with devastating force. Slash! The critical hit struck the center head. The wither shrieked, a metallic, unnatural sound. Its health bar dropped by a visible chunk. It retaliated instantly, spinning its body and slamming into me. The impact knocked me into the cavern wall, and the dreaded black wither effect immediately poisoned my health bar. I ignored the decaying curse. I couldn't waste time eating. I had to outdamage its regeneration. I trapped the wither against the ceiling of the cavern I had forced it to dig, because the tunnel was so confined. The massive boss could not float upward to escape my blade. I became a relentless machine of kinetic violence. Slash, 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 slash. The wither fired explosive skulls at point-blank range. The explosions tore the cavern apart, dropping blocks of netherrack onto my head. My diamond armor groaned under the immense pressure, the durability bars dropping rapidly. My health was a chaotic mess. dropping to 2 hearts from the poison, rising slightly from my saturation, and dropping again from the explosions. The Wither's health dropped to 150 points. Halfway, suddenly, the Wither glowed with a bright white aura. It summoned a shimmering hexagonal shield around its body. It was now completely immune to all projectile damage. It was the armor phase. I don't use arrows. I gritted through my teeth. I stepped directly into its hitbox, ignoring the terrifying contact damage, and unleashed a flurry of strikes. My sword was a blur of violet light. The cavern was entirely consumed by the blinding flashes of explosions and the deafening shrieks of the dying god. 50 points, 20 points, 10 points, with a final, desperate roar. I drove the diamond blade directly through the center of the Wither's ribcage. The massive entity froze. The blue light in its eyes flickered, then died completely. The Wither expanded, glowing with a blinding, pure white light. I raised my shield and backed away. With a sound like a glass universe shattering, the Wither exploded in a spectacular flash of light, completely evaporating into nothingness. The massive health bar at the top of my vision vanished. The cavern fell entirely silent, save for the gentle crackling of a few scattered fires. I dropped to one knee, panting heavily. My health bar was sitting at a terrifying half-heart. My diamond armor was cracked and smoking, but I was alive. I looked at the center of the crater, hovering gently above the shattered netherrack, rotating slowly and emitting a brilliant, piercing white light. Was a single, 4-pointed star, the Nether Star. Even from 10 feet away, I could feel the immense, stabilizing energy radiating from it. It was a fragment of pure reality, a code anchor of infinite power. I walked forward and grabbed the star. Obtained. Nether Star achievement unlocked. The beginning. You have slain the Wither. I placed the glowing star securely into my inventory. I pulled out a loaf of bread, eating it quickly to restore my shattered health. I looked back down the tunnel toward the direction of my portal. The void was erasing the overworld block by block, but I now held the cure to the digital plague. It was time to build the beacon. The purple vortex of the portal spat me CK into the overworld courtyard with a violent, rushing gasp of cool desert air. I stumbled onto the stone bricks, my knees buckling slightly under the sudden change in atmospheric pressure. He returned. Claire's voice pierced the cold silence of the courtyard. She ran toward me, stopping just short of my smoking, cracked diamond armor, her green eyes wide with awe. She stared at the pulsing, brilliant white star clutched in my gauntlet hand. Arthur, you actually did it. There is no time, I grunted, my voice raspy from the sulfur of the nether. I looked up. The sky was no longer blue. The terrifying, lightless black geometry of the void had crawled right to the very edge of my fortress walls. The air was freezing, vibrating with a deafening, metallic buzzing that made my teeth ache. The desert sands just outside our lava moat were actively dissolving, disappearing into a pitch black, bottomless abyss. The system was actively deleting our chunk. I sprinted to my furnaces. I scooped up several blocks of sand from the courtyard floor and jammed them into the burning stone chambers. Within seconds, the progress bars finished. I pulled out 5 blocks of perfectly clear, pixelated glass. I ran to the crafting table. I placed 3 blocks of obsidian along the bottom row. I placed the glowing nether star in the exact center. I surrounded it with the 5 blocks of glass. Chime. A block of absolute majesty materialized in my hands. It was the beacon. It was a beautiful, glass-encased obsidian cube, with a miniature white star hovering inside its core, spinning and humming with an infinite, reality-bending energy. But a beacon was useless without a channel. It needed a pyramid of pure metal to focus its power. I opened my chest. I had the 50 iron ingots melted from the Royal Army's discarded weapons, plus the remaining iron from Brody's bandits. I quickly converted them all into solid blocks of iron. I needed exactly 9 blocks to build a basic 3x3 base. I ran to the very center of the stone courtyard, directly in front of the massive stone keep. With mechanical speed, I placed the 9 iron blocks in a perfect 3x3 square on the dirt. Thud, 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 thud. The solid iron foundation was set. I stepped onto the center of the iron platform. I looked up at the descending black void of the ceiling. I selected the beacon in my hotbar and placed it directly onto the center iron block. The moment the beacon touched the iron, the laws of physics shattered. A deafening, bell-like chime resonated through the entire valley, so powerful that the remaining stone structures vibrated. From the core of the beacon, a massive, brilliant pillar of pure, solid white light erupted. The beam was 10 feet wide, shooting straight up into the heavens with the force of a supermassive star. The white light slammed directly into the black, geometric blocks of the descending void. The collision was spectacular. The black void hissed and writhed like a living creature, trying to consume the light. But the beacon was not just light, it was a source of infinite, stabilizing data. It was an anchor of reality. It forced the corrupted code of the world to reload, rewriting the deleted chunks with their original, pristine state. The white beam expanded. It pushed outward in a massive, circular shockwave of pure energy. Where the light touched, the black abyss was wiped away. The sky turned a brilliant, crystal clear blue. The freezing temperature instantly vanished, replaced by the warm, welcoming heat of the desert sun. The dissolving sands outside our walls solidified, returning to beautiful, geometric dunes of golden dust. The metallic buzzing noise died, replaced by the gentle, whispering wind of a safe and stable world. The void was pushed back 4 miles in every direction. A perfect, circular sanctuary of absolute stability was established around my fortress. The corruption could not cross the barrier of the beacon. Inside the courtyard, the 50 refugees fell to their knees. They did not cheer this time. They were completely silent, weeping tears of pure relief as they stared up at the endless blue sky and the towering pillar of white light that protected them. Elias crawled forward, his hands trembling as he touched the iron base of the beacon. He looked up at me, his eyes filled with a devotion that bordered on worship. "You have saved the world," he whispered. "You have anchored the sky." I slowly removed my enchanted diamond helmet. The cool breeze ruffled my hair. I looked out over the massive stone walls of my fortress, past the bubbling lava moat, and toward the endless horizon. "I didn't save the world, Elias," I said, a faint smile touching my lips. "I just claimed my chunk." The corrupt Governor Silas Mercer was gone, his army broken. The void was held at bay by my glowing beacon, but I knew this was just one corner of a massive, broken map. There were other valleys, other kingdoms, and other survivors hiding in the dark, waiting for someone to rebuild their world. I looked at my hotbar. I had an infinite source of water, a fortress of indestructible stone, a guardian of iron, and a beacon of infinite power. I equipped my diamond pickaxe. There was a whole world out there, waiting to be crafted, and I was just getting started. And that's a wrap, folks. If this story gave you that sweet dopamine hit and was more satisfying than peeling the plastic off a brand new TV, do me a massive favor. Obliterate that like button and hit subscribe. I'm locked in the content mine, serving up fresh, ridiculously satisfying stories every single day. See you tomorrow for your next fix.